Just had to remind everyone of Pluto. Anyway. Good evening, everybody. It is Friday, which means fairy tales. And we are going to be starting a new book. Well, a new old book. A different version of a book we've already read. And as I said, I've read several stories before. It's always interesting to see how they get translated differently. As different translators will write them differently. Just like the stories in my books, pictured below, are not anyone else's translations. They are my translations. Well, my derivative works. But yeah, basically, that's me rewriting the stories and adding to it. I haven't considered if I was going to do Hand Christian Andersen yet, because I'm not sure what all I would add to it. Other than pointing out everything Disney did wrong. But, I really shouldn't criticize people for stuff like that. Because that's the whole purpose of stories, is they are passed on through oral tradition. And with every new generation, the stories change. Which is, just evolution. I know Andrew Lang had said that fairy tales shouldn't be modernized. But if you write a new fairy tale, why not? I am tempted to try to manage to get some kind of copy of the Stitch Thompson. I think I may do the newer version, the Stitch Thompson. I can't remember what the name of it is. But I am tempted to offer on Coffee to write fairy tales for people. And the way I'm going to do it is let them give me numbers. And I will use those motifs to write the story. Hey, Pathogen, welcome in. Oh, and an Aiden. I got double raid. How's everyone doing tonight? Ooh. Slaying the Spire. Pretty good. Just discussing a thing I may do to offer people story writing. I'm thinking about putting it up on my Coffee, that you can give me 3 random numbers, literally from 1 to 1,000, and I write a story based on those motifs. And it would be very random, honestly. Let's see if I can get an example. Let's see. Just like if I said, okay, A17. That motif is an animal as a creator, or the creator, which means an animal is actually the creator of the world. And then you could add in other ones. But I need to get one that's strictly numbers instead of letters and numbers just to make it easier. But it's an idea I'm kind of kicking around. I mean, I've offered 60-second stories. I've done 3 of those that pretty much I summarize an entire fairy tale in 60 seconds or less. I've done a couple of those. And it's really interesting trying to summarize something that I've narrated that takes half an hour and compress it down into a single note sheet pad. It's crazy that I've done that. I don't know if I even have any of those uploaded. I think I just put them on Coffee. Oh, I've got 3 of them in my shorts. I did Thumbelina, I did Snow White, and I did Rapunzel. Snow White took me 61 seconds. But trying to do longer stories, just based on motifs, it would be interesting how I work those in. Because there's so many different motifs in fairy tales that can be used. But tonight we're starting the 23rd book I've read for Friday Night Fairy Tales. And we're going to do Hans Christian Andersen, which is, always fun. People don't realize how serious his fairy tales can be, unless they've actually read them. This is actually a picture of the book I'm reading from. And I do have I'll have a link up to be able to get a copy of the book, but it's going to be on the YouTube channel under links. So, yeah. Lots of stories. Not so much cats sleeping on the bed. But yeah, the motif listing is definitely going to be interesting. I said I just got to work out the details on how I'm going to do that. Because they would be original fairy tales, but they'd have classic fairy tale elements as part of their design. We begin tonight by reading some of the classics. At least as translated. Let's see, when was this one translated? Translation. This one is from 1963. So it depends on how the language is going to turn out. This book, unlike all the Andrew Lang ones, does not have an introduction. It doesn't even have dedications, which I find a little weird. But this is Hans Christian Andersen's Fairy Tales, adapted from Carolyn Peachey's translation by Charlotte Dixon, and illustrations by Jadis Rebiansky, but I don't have a way to show the illustrations, so I can't. And our first story for the night, Thumbelina. Once upon a time there lived a young wife who longed exceedingly to possess a little child of her own, but she did not know how to get one. So she went to an old witch woman and said to her, "I wish so very much to have a tiny little child. Won't you help me to get one, old mother?" "With all my heart," replied the witch. "Here's a barley corn for you. It is not exactly of the same sort as those that grow in the farmer's fields, or that are given to the fowls in the poultry yard. Sow it in a flower pot, and you shall see what you shall see." "Oh, thank you," cried the woman, and she gave the witch a silver sixpence. Having returned home, she sowed the barley corn as she had been directed, whereupon a large and beautiful flower immediately shot forth from the flower pot. It looked like a tulip, but the petals were tightly folded up as though it were still a bud. "What a lovely flower!" exclaimed the young woman, and she kissed the pretty red and yellow petals. And as she kissed them, the flower gave a loud bang and opened up. It had indeed become a tulip, but on the point, but on the small green point, the center of the flower, there sat a tiny little girl, so pretty and so delicate to look at, but her whole body scarcely bigger than a thumb. So the young woman called her Thumbelina. Pretty varnished walnut shell was given to Thumbelina as a cradle. Blue and violet leaves served as her mattress, and a rose leaf was her coverlet. Here she slept at night, but in the daytime she played on the table. The woman had filled a plate with water and had laid flowers around it, while the stalks lay in the water. On the surface floated a large tulip petal, and on it Thumbelina would sit and sail from side of the plate to the other, using two white horsehairs for oars. That looked quite charming. And Thumbelina could sing, too, and she sang such low, sweet tones as ever were heard before. One night, while Thumbelina was lying in her pretty little bed, a great ugly toad came hopping through the broken window pane. The toad was such a big creature, old and withered looking, and wet, too. She jumped up on the table where Thumbelina lay sleeping under her rose petal. "This is the wife for my son," said the toad, and she seized a walnut shell with Thumbelina in it, and hopped away with her through the window and into the garden. Here flowed a large, Here flowed a broad stream, its banks muddy and swampy, and it was here that the old toad and her son dwelt. Oh, how hideous and deformed he was, just like his mother. Rex, Rex. That was all he could find to say on seeing the pretty little maiden in her tiny walnut shell. "Don't make such a riot," said the old mother toad, "or you will wake her, and she may easily run away from us. For she is as light as a swan down feather. We will take her into the brook and set her down on one of the large water lily leaves. It will be like an island to her who is so slight and small. Then she cannot run away from us, and she can go and get a stateroom ready down under the mud where you and she are to dwell together." Out in the middle of the brook there grew many water lilies with broad green leaves, each of which seemed to be floating on the water. The leaf which was the farthest from shore was also the largest. The leaf Out to it swam old Mother Toad, and on it carefully she set the walnut shell with Thumbelina. When the poor tiny little creature woke the next morning, and when she saw where she was, she began to weep most bitterly. There was water, nothing but water, on all sides of the large green leaf, and she could in no way reach the land. Old Mother Toad was sitting down in the mud, decorating her apartment with bulrushes and yellow buttercups, as to make it as gay and tidy to receive her new daughter-in-law. At last she and her hideous son swam together to the leaf where they had left Thumbelina. They wanted first to fetch her pretty little cradle and place it in the bridal chamber before she herself was conducted to it. The old Mother Toad bowed low in the water and said to her, "Yes, my son, he is to be your husband. You will dwell together very comfortably in the mud." Was again all her son could say. Then they took the little bed and swam away with it, whilst Thumbelina was sitting alone on the green leaf, weeping bitterly, for she did not like the thought of living with a withered old toad and having her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes, however, that were swimming to and fro in the water beneath her, had seen the toad and heard what she said, so they now put up their heads. They wanted to see the little maiden. And when they saw her, they were charmed with her delicate beauty, and it vexed them very much that the hideous old toad should carry her off. No, that should never be. So they surrounded the green stalk in the water, whereupon rested the water lily leaf and gnawed asunder with their teeth. The leaf floated down the brook, with Thumbelina on it, away, far away, where the old toad could not follow. No problem. Thumbelina sailed past many large and small cities, and the wild birds in the bushes saw her and sang, "Oh, such a sweet little maiden!" On and on, farther and farther floated the leaf, and that is how Thumbelina traveled into a different country. A pretty little white butterfly kept fluttering around and around her, and at last it fluttered down on the leaf, for he loved Thumbelina very much, and she was pleased. There was nothing to trouble her now that she had no fear of the old toad pursuing her, and wherever she sailed, everything was so beautiful. The sun shone down on the water, making it bright as liquid gold. And now she took off the sash and tied one end of it around the butterfly, fastening the other end firmly to the leaf. And on floated the leaf, faster and faster, and Thumbelina floated with it, for she was standing on it. Presently, however, a big cockchafer came buzzing past. He caught sight of Thumbelina and immediately fastened his claw around her slender waist, and flew up into a tree with her. But the green leaf still floated down the brook, and the butterfly with it, for he was bound to the leaf and could not get loose. How terrified poor Thumbelina was when the cockchafer carried her up into the tree, and how sorry she felt for the darling white butterfly which she had left tied fast to the leaf. She feared that, if he could not get away, he would perish of hunger. But the cockchafer cared nothing for that. He settled her upon the largest leaf of the tree and gave her some honey from the flowers to eat, telling her that she was very pretty, although she was not at all like a henchafer. By and by, all the chafers who lived in the tree came to pay her a visit. They looked at Thumbelina from all sides. One girl henchafer drew in her feelers contemptuously and said, "She's only got 2 legs! How funny that looks!" "She's got no feelers," said another, "and look how thin and lean her waist is." "Aye, she looks just like a human being," observed the third. "Oh, how very, very ugly she is!" cried all the lady chafers in chorus. The chafer that had carried Thumbelina could still not persuade himself that she was otherwise than pretty, but as all the rest kept repeating and insisting that she was ugly, he eventually began to think that they must be right, and determined to have nothing more to do with her. She might go wherever she wanted for all he cared, he said. And so the whole swarm flew down the tree with her and set her on a daisy. Then Thumbelina wept because she was so ugly that not even the chafers would keep company with her. And yet she was the prettiest little creature that could be imagined, soft and delicate and transparent as the loveliest rose petal. All through this poor All through the summer, poor Thumbelina lived alone in the wide wood. She wove herself a bed of grass blades and hung it under a large burdock leaf, which sheltered her from the rain. She dined off the honey from the flowers, and she drank from the dew that every morning spangled the leaves around her. And thus passed the summer and autumn. But then came winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung so sweetly to her flew away. Trees and flowers withered. The large burdock leaf under which she had sheltered rolled itself up and became a dry yellow stalk. Thumbelina was fearfully cold. Her clothes were wearing out, and she herself was so light and frail, poor little thing, she was nearly frozen to death. It began to snow, and every light flake that fell upon her made her feel as we would if a whole shovelful of snow was thrown upon us. For we are giants compared with a little creature, only an inch long. She wrapped herself up in a withered leaf, and she still shuddered with the cold. Just outside the wood where Thumbelina had been living lay a large cornfield, but the corn had been carried away long ago, leaving only the dry, naked stubble standing up from the hard, frozen earth. For Thumbelina, however, this stubble was like another dense wood, and oh, how she shivered with cold, and she made her way through. At last she came to a door which hid a little hole where a field mouse dwelt snugly and comfortably in a room, and a kitchen with a larder full of corn besides. Thumbelina stood at the door like a little beggar girl and begged for a small piece of barley corn, for she had had nothing to eat for 2 whole days. "You poor thing," said the field mouse, who was indeed a thoroughly good-natured creature. "Come into my warm room and dine with me." As soon as and as she soon took a great liking to Thumbelina, she said a little later, "You may dwell with me if you like all winter, but you must keep my room clean and neat and tell me stories, for I love stories dearly." And Thumbelina did all that kind old field mouse required for her, and was made very comfortable in her new abode. One day the field mouse said, "We are sure to have a visitor presently. My next door neighbor comes to see me once every week. He is better off than I am, and has large rooms in a splendid house, and walks about in a coat of beautiful black velvet. It would be a capital thing for you to see if you could secure him for your husband. But unfortunately he is blind and cannot see you. You must tell him the prettiest stories you know." Thumbelina did not care at all about pleasing their neighbor, for he was a mole, and she did not wish to marry him. Indeed, he came and paid a visit in his black velvet suit. He was so rich and so learned, the field mouse declared, and in addition his living quarters were 20 times larger than hers. But the sun and the pretty flowers he could not see, and that is why he could not endure them, and was always abusing them. Thumbelina was called upon to sing for his amusement, and she sang, lady bird, fly away home," and "the friar of the porter's gray." And by the time she had sung, the mole had quite fallen in love with her, because of her charm and her sweet voice. However, he said nothing yet, for he was such a prudent, cautious man. But he dug a long passage through the earth leading from their house to his, and he now gave permission to the field mouse and Thumbelina to walk in it as often as they liked. However, he bade them not to be afraid of the dead bird that lay in the passage. It was a whole bird with beak and feathers entire, and therefore he supposed it must have died quite lately, at the beginning of winter, and had just buried in this place where he had dug his passage. The mole took in his mouth a piece of dead wood, which shone like a faint fire in the dark, and went on first to light his friends through the long dark passage. When he came to the place where the dead bird lay, he thrust his broad nose up against the ceiling and pushed up the earth, as to make a big hole for daylight to come through. In the middle of the floor there lay a swallow, his wings clinging firmly to his sides, his head and legs drawn underneath his feathers. The poor bird had evidently died of cold. Thumbelina felt so very sorry for it, for she loved all the little birds who sung and chirped so merrily to her all the way through summer. But the mole kicked the swallow with his short legs and said, "It's a fine end for all its singing. A miserable thing it must be a miserable thing it must be to be born a bird. None of my children will be birds, that's a comfort. Such creatures have nothing to do but to kill it in the winter, and then they starve to death." "Yes, indeed, a sensible animal like you may do so well to say," replied the field mouse. "What is such a bird got with all his chirping and chirruping? When winter comes it must starve and freeze, and this is even considered to be noble." Thumbelina said nothing at all, but when the two others had turned their backs upon the bird, she bent over it, gently smoothed down its feathers and covered its head, and kissed its closed eyes. "Perhaps it was just one thing that sang so delightfully to me in summertime," she thought. "How much pleasure he has given me, dear, dear bird." The mole now stopped up the hole through which the daylight had pierced, and then he saw the lady's home. But Thumbelina could not sleep that night. So she got out of bed, wove a blanket out of hay, and then went down and spread it over the dead bird. She also fetched some soft cotton wool, which she had found in the field mouse's room, and laid it around the bird so that he might be warm in the cold earth. "Farewell to you, dear bird," she said. "Farewell, and thanks for your beautiful song in the summertime, when all the trees were green and the sun shone so warmly on us." Then she pressed her head against the bird's breast, but was terrified to feel something beating within it. That was the bird's heart. The swallow was not dead. In fact, it had lain in a faint, and now that it had been warmed, its life had returned. Every autumn the swallows fly away to warm countries, but now and then it happens that one of them lingers behind. Then it freezes and falls down as though dead. The snow covers it, and soon its little heart stops beating. Thumbelina trembled with fear, for the bird was very large compared with her, who was only an inch in length. However, in the end she took courage, laid the cotton wool more closely round the poor swallow, and fetching a mint leaf, which had served herself as a coverlet, and spread it over the bird's head. The next night she stole out again, and went down to the bird. She found that the swallow's life had quite returned, but it was so feeble that it could only do one short moment. It could open its eyes to look at Thumbelina, who stood by with a piece of dead wood in her hand, because she had no other lantern. "Thank you so much, sweet little child," whispered the sick swallow. "I feel delightfully warm now. Soon I will recover my strength and be able to fly again out in the warm sunshine." "Oh no," she replied. "It is too cold outside. The snow is coming down and it is freezing. You must stay in your warm bed. I shall nurse you back to health." Thumbelina brought a shower of water with a water kettle, and drank. And then he told her how he had torn one of his wings in a thorn bush, and therefore could not fly fast enough to keep pace with the other swallows, who were all migrating to the warm countries. At last he had fallen to the earth, and more than he could not remember. He did not know at all how he had ended up underground. However, underground he remained all through the winter, and Thumbelina was kind to him and loved him dearly, but she never said a word about him either to the mole or to the field mouse. And in that she was right, for she knew very well that they would not injure the poor swallow. As soon as spring came and the sun's warmth had penetrated the earth, the swallow said farewell to Thumbelina and opened the hole in the ceiling which the mole had made and then sealed up again. The sun shone in upon them deliciously, and the swallow asked Thumbelina whether she would like to go with him. She could sit on his back, and then would fly out together into the green wood. But Thumbelina knew it would vex the old field mouse if she were to leave without her saying goodbye. "No, I cannot. I must not go," said Thumbelina. Farewell, good and pretty maiden, called the swallow, and away he flew into the sunshine. Thumbelina gazed after him, and her tears welled up in her eyes, for she loved the swallow so much. Give it, sang the bird, and he flew into the wood. Thumbelina was now sad indeed. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine. The wheat that had been sown in the field above the field mouse's house grew up so high that it seemed a perfect forest to the poor little girl, who was only 1 inch high. This summer you must work at getting your trousseau ready, said the field mouse to Thumbelina. Our neighbor has made his proposal to you, which is a lucky thing for you, poor child. You shall have wool and linen material aplenty, and you should not lack anything if you become the mole's wife. So Thumbelina had to work hard at the distaff, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders to spin and weave all night and day. Every morning the mole came, as he always liked to talk about the summer coming soon to an end. Then, when the sun no longer shone so warmly, scorching the earth until it was dry as stone, then, at the beginning of autumn, his wedding to Thumbelina should take place. But this sort of conversation did not please Thumbelina at all. She was thoroughly wearied of his dullness and his prating. Every morning when the sun rose and every evening when it set, she used to steal out of doors and waited for the wind to blow the tops of the corn aside so that she could see the blue sky through the opening. Then she thought how bright and beautiful it was out there, and she wished most fervently to see the dear swallow once more. But he might never come again. Most probably had flown away in the beautiful green wood. Autumn came, and Thumbelina's trousseau was ready. "Another 4 weeks, and you shall be married," said the field mouse. But Thumbelina wept, and said she would not marry the dull mole. "Fiddlesticks!" exclaimed the field mouse. "Don't be obstinate, child, or I shall bite you with my white teeth. Isn't he a handsome man in his black velvet coat? Why, even the queen must envy him. His kitchen and larder are filled. Whatever else do you want? Be thankful to get such a rich husband." So Thumbelina had to be married. The day fixed had arrived. The mole had already come to fetch the bride. She was now to dwell with him in the deep under the earth, never again to come out to the warm sunshine, which she so loved and he could not endure. The poor child was in despair at the thought that she must now bid a last farewell to the beautiful sun, of which she had at least been allowed to catch a glimpse of every now and then when she lived with the field mouse. "Farewell, you glorious sun!" she cried, throwing her arms up into the air, and she walked on a little way beyond the field mouse's door. The corn was already reaped, and only the dry stubble surrounded her. "Farewell, farewell!" she repeated as she clasped her tiny arms around a little flower that grew there. "Greet the dear swallow from me if you should see him." "Give it! Give it!" There was a fluttering of wings above her head. She looked up, and behold, the little swallow was flying past. How pleased he was when he saw Thumbelina. She told him how she had been obliged to accept the disagreeable mole as a husband, and that she would have to dwell deep underground where the sun never shone, and she could not help weeping as she spoke. "I will be here soon," said the swallow, "and I shall be far away to the warm countries. Will you come with me? I shall carry you on my back. All you need to do is tie yourself fast with your sash, and thus we will fly away to the dumb mole and the dark rooms, far over the mountains to those countries where the sun shines even more brightly than here, where it is always summer and where the flowers blossom all year long. Come and fly with me, sweet little Thumbelina, who saved my life when I lay frozen in the dark cellars of the earth." "Oh, yes, I will go with you," said Thumbelina. She seated herself on the bird's back, her feet resting on the outspread wings, and she tied her girdle firmly around one of the strongest feathers. And then the swallow soared high into the air and flew way over forest and lake, over mountains covered with snow all year round. And when Thumbelina shivered as she breathed the frosty air, she crept down under the bird's warm feathers, and only her little head peered forth, eager to behold all the glory and beauty beneath her. At last they reached the warm countries. There the sun shone far more brightly than in her native land. The sky seemed twice as high, and in sloping hills were rich abundance of the loveliest green and purple grapes. Lemons and oranges were seen in groves. The fragrance of myrtle and balsam filled the air, and by the wayside children played with large bright butterflies. But the swallow did not rest there. No, he flew on, and the scenery seemed to grow more and more beautiful. Near a calm blue lake overhung by lofty trees stood an ancient palace of white marble. Vines trailed up along slender pillars, and on the top of them, among the green leaves and waving tendrils, many a swallow had built his nest, and one of these nests belonged to the swallow on whose back Thumbelina was riding. "This is my house," said the swallow. "Now you choose for yourself the prettiest flower growing beneath us. I will take you to it, and we shall make a happy home here." "That will be wonderful!" exclaimed Thumbelina, clapping her tiny hands. On the green turf beneath lay the fragments of white marble column, which had fallen to the ground and broken in three pieces. And around these fragments grew some large, beautiful white flowers. The swallow flew down with Thumbelina and set her on one of the broad petals. But how surprised she was when she saw sitting in the very heart of the flower a little mannikin, fair and transparent as though he were made of glass, wearing the prettiest gold crown on his head and the brightest, most delicate wings on his shoulders, was scarcely a whit larger than Thumbelina herself. In every blossom there dwelt such a fairy, man or woman, but this one was the king of them all. "Oh, how handsome he is!" whispered Thumbelina to the swallow. The fairy prince was quite startled at the sudden descent of the swallow, who was giant compared with him. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was delighted, for she was the loveliest maiden he had ever seen. So he took off his gold crown from his head, and set it upon hers, and asked her name, and whether she would be his bride and reign as queen over the flower spirits. He, of course, was quite different man from the son of the ugly toad, or the blond, dull mole with his black velvet coat. So Thumbelina said yes to the beautiful prince, and then the fairy men or fairy women came out, each from a separate flower. Gracefully and courteously they paid their homage, and every one of them brought her a present. But the best of all the presents was a pair of transparent wings, which were fastened on Thumbelina's shoulders, and enabled her to fly from flower to flower. That was a joy, and the swallow sat in his nest above and sang his sweetest song. In his heart, however, he was sad, for he loved Thumbelina, and would have wished never to part from her. "You shall be no longer named Thumbelina," said the king of the flowers to his dainty, graceful little wife. "You are much too lovely for such an ugly name. We shall call you Maya." "Farewell, farewell," said the swallow, and away he flew to the warm countries, and far back to the north. There he had a little nest just above the window of a man who writes stories for children. "Give it, give it, give it," he sang to him every morning, and it is from him that we heard this beautiful story. Yay. I think Thumbelina was one that I said it. Yeah, I did. 49 seconds. I'm going to see what it looks like. Okay. Okay, let's see how badly I did this. Okay, so a woman wanted a kid, she planted a seed, boom, little girl in the bloom, right? Well, they were happy, and then Toadstool were to marry her for a son. Well, leaving her on water lily. No, fish freed her, the leaf floated away and took her downstream. She was rescued by a bug. He thought, okay, she's cool, oh, she's hot, I'll take her home. Well, peer pressure made him believe that she was actually ugly because all the other bugs thought she was ugly, so he gave her root. Anyway, she ends up with a field mouse who takes care of her pretty well. Then she finds out that the field mouses wanted to essentially sell her to a mole. Well, they also found a dead bird in the mole hole, so everything was fine and good. Then spring came around. The bird wasn't dead. He rescues her from the mole, takes her to the fairies, she marries the fairy prince, and they live happily ever after. What story is this? Thumbelina. Okay. That was only 49 seconds. One more time. And took her downstream. She was rescued by a bug. He thought, okay, she's cool, oh, she's hot, I'll take her home. Well, necromancer reaches. Oh. Okay, so a woman wanted a kid, she planted a seed, boom, little girl in the bloom, right? Well, they were happy, and then Toadstool were to marry her for a son. Well, leaving her on water lily. No, fish freed her, the leaf floated away and took her downstream. She was rescued by a bug. He thought, okay, she's cool, oh, she's hot, I'll take her home. Well, peer pressure made him believe that she was actually ugly because all the other bugs thought she was ugly, so he gave her root. Anyway, she ends up with a field mouse who takes care of her pretty well. Then she finds out that the field mouses wanted to essentially sell her to a mole. Well, they also found a dead bird in the mole hole, so everything was fine and good. Then spring came around. The bird wasn't dead. He rescues her from the mole, takes her to the fairies, she marries the fairy prince, and they live happily ever after. What story is this? Thumbelina. As I said, I was doing very fast versions of stories. I think the only thing I missed were the fish and the butterfly. I could probably edit those and that would have made it 60 seconds. But anyway. Okay, the next one is another story that I have seen different versions of. The Princess and the Pea. There was once a prince who wished to marry a princess, but she had to be a real princess. He traveled all over the world in hopes of finding such a lady, but there was always something wrong. Princesses he found aplenty, but whether they were real princesses, it was impossible for him to decide. Now one thing, now another seemed to be not quite right. At last he returned to his palaces, quite cast down, because he wished so much to have a real princess for a wife. One evening a fearful tempest arose, and there was thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down from the sky in torrents. All at once he heard a violent knocking at the door, and the old king, the prince's father, went out himself to open it. It was the princess who was standing outside. What with the rain and the wind, she was in a sad condition. The water trickled down from her hair, and her clothes clung to her body. You could hardly believe it, but she said she was a real princess. "We shall soon see about that," thought the old queen. However, she did not say a word of what she was going to do, but went quietly into the bedroom, took all the bedclothes off the bed, and put one little pea, just a single round pea, on the bedstead. Then she piled 20 mattresses, one upon the other, over the pea, and put 20 feather beds over the mattresses. On this bed the princess was to pass the night. The next morning she was asked how she had slept. "Ah, very badly indeed," she replied. "I scarcely closed my eyes all the night through. I do not know what was in the bed, but I had something hard under me, and black and blue all over. It hurt me so much." Now, it was plain that the lady must be a real princess, since she had been able to feel the one little pea through 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. None but a real princess could have had such a delicate sense of feeling. The prince accordingly made her his wife, being now quite convinced that he had found a real princess. The pea, however, was put into the city's cabinet of curiosities, where it is still to be seen, provided nobody has taken it. You see, this is a true story. That is a very brief version of it compared to some of the others I've read. The other one was How to Tell a True Princess. I think that is the Grimm Brothers version of it. We have 14 minutes. I might be able to get through this next one. I will try to pause the ads if not. As our next story for the night, The Emperor's New Clothes. Many years ago, there was an emperor who was so excessively fond of new clothes that he spent all of his money on dress. He did not trouble himself in the least about his soldiers, nor did he care to go either to the theatre or to hunt, except for the opportunities. Then he displayed his new clothing. He had a different suit for each hour of the day, and as of any other king or emperor one is accustomed to say, he is sitting in council. It was always said of him, the emperor is sitting in his dressing room. Time passed away very merrily in the large town which was his capital. Strangers arrived every day at the court. One day 2 rogues, calling themselves weavers, made their appearance. They gave out what they knew on how to weave materials of most beautiful colors and elaborate patterns, and clothes manufactured from which should have been wonderfully propriety of remaining invisible to anyone who was unfit for the office he held, or who was extraordinarily simple in character. These must be indeed the splendid clothes, thought the emperor. Had I such a suit, I might at once find out what men in my realm are unfit for their office, and also be able to distinguish the wise from the foolish. This stuff must be woven for me immediately. And he caused large sums of money to be given in advance to both the weavers, in order that they might begin their work directly. So the 2 sham weavers set up 2 looms and affected to work very busily, through the reality they did nothing at all. There was not a single thread on their looms. They asked for the most delicate silk and the purest gold thread, put both into their knapsacks, and then continued their pretended work on the empty looms until late at night. I should like to know how the weavers are getting on in my cloth, thought the emperor. He was, however, rather worried when he remembered that a simpleton, one unfit for his office, would be unable to see the manufacture. It would be better to send somebody else to bring him intelligence about the work before he troubled himself with the affair. All the people throughout the city had heard of the wonderful property the cloth was to possess, and all were anxious to learn how wise or how ignorant their neighbors might prove to be. "Oh, send my faithful prime minister to the weavers," he thought, after some deliberation. "He will be best able to see what the cloth looks like, for he is a man of sense, and nobody can be more suitable for his office than he." So the honest prime minister went into the hall where the knaves were working with all their might at their empty looms. He opened his eyes wide when he found he could see nothing, but he did not say so. The impostors requested him very courteously to be so good as to come near the looms, and then asked them whether the design pleased him or whether the colors were not very beautiful, and then they pointed to the empty frames. The old prime minister looked and looked, but he could not discover anything in the looms, for the simple reason that there was nothing there. "Good heavens!" he thought. "Can it be that I am a simpleton and unfit for my office? I never thought of myself. Nobody must ever know." "Well, sir," said one of the knaves, still pretending to work, "you do not say whether the stuff pleases you." Oh, it is admirable, replied the old minister, looking at the loom through his spectacles. This pattern, these colors, yes, I will tell the emperor how beautiful I think it is. We shall be very much obliged to you, said the impostors, and then they named the different colors and described the pattern of the pretended stuff. The old minister listened attentively to the words in order that he might repeat to them, to the emperor. The knaves then asked for more gold thread and silk, and more money, saying that it was necessary to complete what they had begun. However, they put all into their knapsacks and continued to work at their empty looms with much apparent diligence as before. The emperor now sent another officer from his court to see how the men were getting on, and to ascertain whether the cloth would be ready. It was the same with this gentleman as it was the minister. He surveyed the looms on all sides, but could see nothing but the empty frames. Doesn't the stuff appear as beautiful to you as it did the Prime Minister? Asked Rhodes, the Emperor's second ambassador, taking the design and colors which were not there. Certainly not stupid, thought the messenger. It must be that I'm not fit for my good, profitable office. However, no one shall know anything about it. And accordingly he praised the stuff he could not see, and declared that it was delightful in both colors and patterns. It will please your majesty, he said to his sovereign in return. The whole city was talking of the splendid cloth which the emperor had ordered to be woven at his own expense. And now the emperor himself wished to see the costly manufacture whilst it was still on the loom. Accompanied by a select number of officers from the court, among whom were the two honorable men who had already admired the cloth, he went to the crafty impostors who, as soon as they were aware of the emperor's approach, went on pretending to work more diligently than ever. Is the work not magnificent? Said the two officers already mentioned. If your majesty would only look at the design and the colors. At the same time, they pointed to the empty frames, for they imagined that everyone but themselves could see the exquisite piece of workmanship. This is indeed a terrible affair, thought the emperor to himself, for he could not see anything, absolutely nothing. Am I a simpleton, or am I unfit to be emperor? And he felt awful. Oh, the cloth is charming, he said aloud. It has my entire approval. And he smiled most graciously and looked closely at the empty looms. All his retinue now strained their eyes, hoping to discover something in the looms, but they could not see any more than the others. Nevertheless, they all exclaimed, "Oh, how beautiful!" and advised His Majesty to have some new clothes made for splendid material to be used at the forthcoming great procession. Magnificent, charming, excellent, resounded on all sides. The emperor shared in the general satisfaction and presented the impostors with a ribbon of an order of knighthood to be worn round their buttonholes, and the title of imperial weavers. The rogues sat up the whole night before the day, which burning so that they see how anxious they were to finish the emperor's new suit. They pretended to roll the The rogues sat up the whole night before the day on which had 16 lights burning so they might see how anxious they were to finish the emperor's new suit. They pretended to roll the cloth off the looms, they cut the air with their scissors, they sewed with needles without any thread in them. See, the last cried, the emperor's new clothes are ready. Why is it saying it on resources? In the morning, the emperor, with all the grandees of his court, came to the weavers, and the knaves raised their arms as if to act of holding something up, saying, "Here, your majesty's trousers, and here's a scarf, here's a mantle. The whole suit is as light as a cobweb. One might fancy one has nothing on at all, when dressed in it. But that is a great virtue of this delicate cloth." Yes, indeed, thought all but one of them, "If your imperial majesty will graciously please to take off your clothes," said the impostors, We will fit on the new suit in front of the mirror. Accordingly, the Emperor undressed, and the rogues pretended to array him in his new suit. They seemingly fastened something here, and smoothed the pleat here, and made it so closing the buckle and trying to look untrained. The Emperor turning around from side to side before the looking glass. How splendid His Majesty looks in his new clothes, and how well they fit! Everyone cried out. What design! What colors! These are indeed royal robes. Or just a birthday suit. The Emperor began to feel cold, for he was not wearing anything, but he turned again in front of the looking glass in order that he might appear to be examining his handsome suit. The lords of the bedchamber felt around on the ground as if they were lifting up the ends of the mantle, and did not dare to betray anything like simplicity or unfitness for their office. So now the Emperor walked under the high canopy in the midst of the procession through the streets of the capital, and all the people standing by, and those in the windows cried out, "Oh, look how beautiful the Emperor's new clothes are! What a magnificent train! How graceful the scarf hangs!" No one would admit that they could not see these much admired clothes, because in doing so he would have been declared himself a simpleton and unfit for his office. Certainly none of the Emperor's various suits have ever excited so much admiration in this non-existent one. I'm going to go ahead and pause here because I can't pause the ads for some reason. The best line in the story is coming up, so ouch. See you in a bit. Hope everyone had a good break. Sorry about the ads. As I said, for some reason it wouldn't let me pause them, which is a shame considering how little was left. But anyway. But the emperor has nothing on at all, said a little child. Listen to the voice of innocence, exclaimed his father, and what the child had said was whispered from one to another. The emperor, who in his nakedness felt the cold badly, was vexed, for he knew that the people were right. But he thought the procession must go on now, and the lords of the bedchamber took greater pains than ever to appear to be holding up a train, although in reality there was no train to hold. When the procession was over, the emperor sent for the two impostors, but they had in the meantime quietly departed. See, that's all that was left. And Twitch has to go and run ads. Oh well. Here's another very familiar one. Most of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales are really well known. But our next story, excuse me, The Ugly Duckling. It was beautiful in the country. It was summertime, the wheat was yellow, the oats were green, the hay was stacked up in the meadows, and the stork paraded about on his long red legs, discoursing in Egyptian, which language he had learned from his mother. The fields and meadows were skirted by thick woods, and deep lakes lay in the midst of the woods. Yes, it was indeed indescribably beautiful in the country. The sunshine fell warmly on an old mansion surrounded by deep canals, and from the walls down to the water's edge there grew large burdock leaves, so high that children could stand upright among them without being seen. The place was as wild and unfrequented as the thickest part of the wood. A duck had chosen to make her nest there. She was sitting on her eggs, but the pleasure she had felt at first was now almost gone. She was bored, because she had been there for so long and had so few visitors that the other ducks preferred swimming in the canals to sitting among the burdock leaves and gossiping with her. At last the eggs cracked, one after another. All the eggs were alive, and one little head after another popped out. "Crack, crack, out with you!" said the duck, and all the ducklings got up as best they could. And they peeped out from under the green leaves, and the green is good for the eyes. Their mother let them look as long as they needed. "How large the world is!" said the little ones, for they found their present situation very different from their former confined one inside an egg. "You imagine the whole world?" said the mother. "It extends far beyond the other side of the garden to the vicar's field, but I myself have never been there. Oh, dear." And then she got up. "Oh, dear," she thought. "The largest egg is still here. How long does it take? I'm so very weary of it." And then she sat down again. "I'm really fed up with it." And as she was sitting there brooding, another duck arrived to pay her a visit. "Well, how are the eggs getting on?" asked the visitor. "This one egg keeps me so long," said the mother. "It simply will not break. But you should see the others. They're the prettiest little ducklings I have seen in all my days. They look like their handsome father, that good-for-nothing fellow. He has not been here since visiting me once." "Oh, let me have a look at that egg that will not break," said the visiting duck. "Depend upon it, it's a turkey's egg. I cheated in the same way once. I had such trouble with the young ones, and they were terribly afraid of the water, and I could not get them in. I called and scolded, but it was of no use. But let me see the egg. Oh, yes, to be sure, that is a turkey's egg. Leave it, and rather teach the others ones how to swim." I will sit and wait a little longer, said the duck. I've been sitting so long, now I want to see what will come out. As you like, said the visitor, and waddled out. At last, the big egg burst, said the little one as it tumbled out. But oh, how big and ugly it was! The duck looked at it closely. That is a big, strong creature, she said. It is not like any of the others. Can it be a young turkey cock? Well, we shall soon find out. It has got to go into the water, even if I have to push it in myself. The next day there was the delightful weather, and the sun shone warmly upon all the green leaves, when Mother Duck, with all her family, went to the canal. Plump! She went into the water. Quack, quack! She called out. One duckling after another jumped in. The water closely covered. The water closed over their heads, but all came up again and swam together proudly. Their legs moved without effort, and there were even the big, ugly gray one. Well, it's not a turkey, said the mother duck. How prettily it moves its legs. It holds itself upright. It is my own child, and it does not look so bad after all if one looks closely at it. Quack, quack! Now come with me. I will take you into the world and introduce you to the duck yard. But you must keep close to me or someone may tread on you. And beware of the cats. So they came into the duck yard. There was a horrid noise going on. Two families were quarreling about the remains of an eel, but in the end it was secured by the cat. See, my children, such is the way of the world, said Mother Duck, wiping her beak, for she too was fond of eels. Now use your legs, she admonished them. Keep well together and bow to the old duck you see over there. She is the most distinguished of all the fowl present. She is of Spanish blood, which accounts for her dignified appearance and manners. And look, she has a red ribbon on her leg. That is considered very handsome and is the greatest distinction a duck can have. It means that she has got rid of and is appreciated both by animals and humans. Don't turn your feet inward. The well-educated duckling always keeps his legs far apart like his father and mother. Just look. So, now bow your heads and say quack. And they did as they were told, but the other ducks who were in the yard looked at them and said aloud, Now we have another brood, as if there's not enough of us already. And fie, how ugly that one over there is! It makes us ill to look at. And immediately one of the ducks flew at him and bit him on the neck. Leave him alone, said the mother. He is not doing any harm. Oh, yes, but he is so large and so strange-looking. We ought to get rid of him, said another duck. Those fine children that our good mother has, said the old duck with the red ribbon on her leg. All are pretty, except that one. It has not turned out very well. If only she could hatch it all over again. That cannot be done, your highness, said the mother. No, he is not very handsome, I admit, but he is a very good child, and he swims as well as the others, if not better. I think he will turn out like the others, as well others, and all in good time. Perhaps he will even grow a little smaller. He stayed rather too long in the eggshell, which is why his shape is not quite right. And she stroked his whole body and smoothed his feathers. Besides, she added, he is a drake, therefore it does not matter very much what he looks like. I think he will be very strong. He will fight his way through. The last was said somewhat by the way of conciliation to herself. Oh, probably, possibly, said the old duck. Anyway, the other little ones are very charming indeed. Pray, make yourselves at home, and if you should find an eel's head, you can bring it to me. And accordingly, they made themselves at home. But the poor little duckling who had come out last of its eggshell, and who was so ugly, was bitten and pecked and teased by both ducks and hens. It's too large, they all said. One big cockerel, who had come into the world with spurs and therefore imagined he was emperor, puffed himself up like a ship, full sail, and marched up to the duckling, crowed, and grew quite white with passion. Poor little thing scarcely knew what to do. He was quite distressed because he was so ugly, and because he was just the whole poultry yard. So passed the first day, and afterward matters grew worse and worse. The poor duckling was scorned by all. Even his brothers and sisters behaved unkindly, and wished the cat would catch him. His mother said, "If you were only far away." The ducks bit him, the hens pecked him, and the girl who fed the poultry kicked him. Then one day the little duckling ran away. He fluttered over the fence, and the little birds in the bushes were terrified. "That is because I am so ugly," thought the duckling, shutting his eyes and running on blindly. At last he came to a wide moor where lived some wild ducks. Here he might lay the whole night. He was so tired and so distressed. In the morning the wild ducks flew up and noticed their new companion. "Pray, who are you?" they asked. Our ugly little duckling bowed in all directions and greeted them as politely as possible, with his little heart trembling violently. "You really are uncommonly ugly," said the wild ducks. "However, that does not matter to us, provided you do not marry into our family." Poor thing! He had never thought of marrying. He only begged permission to lie among the reeds and drink the water of the moor. There he lay for 2 whole days. On the third day came 2 wild geese, or rather ganders, who had not been long out of their eggshells, which accounted for their impertinence. "Listen," they said, "we like you because you're so ugly. Come with us and become a bird of passage. Another moor not far from here, there are some wild, sweet geese, all lovely creatures, who keep saying, 'Hiss, hiss.' You are truly on the way to make your fortune, ugly as you are." So they all went their way. A gun went off all at once, and both wild geese were stretched dead among the reeds, and the water became red with blood. Another gun went off. The whole flocks of wild geese flew up from among the reeds, and another report followed. This was a grand shooting party. The sportsmen were all lying in ambush all around. Some were even sitting in the trees whose large branches stretched far over the moor. The blue smoke rose through the thick growth like a mist that was dispersed as it fell over the water. The gun dogs splashed about in the mud. The reeds and rushes bent in all directions. How frightened the poor little duck was. He tried to hide his head under his wing, but suddenly the most formidable-looking dog stood close to him, his tongue hanging out of his mouth, his eyes sparkling fearfully. When he opened his jaws wide at the side of our duckling and showed his sharp white teeth, splash, splash, he was gone. Gone without hurting him. "Let me be thankful," the duckling sighed. "I am so ugly that even the dog would not bite me." And now he lay quite still, while shot followed shot through the reeds. The noise did not cease till late in the day, and even then the poor thing dared not stir. He waited several hours before he looked around him, and hastened away from the moor as fast as he could. He ran over fields and meadows, though the wind was so strong he could hardly move against it. Towards evening he reached the wretched little hut. It was standing so crookedly that it did not know on which side to fall, and therefore remained standing. The wind blew so violently that our duckling had to sit down on his tail, for all his strength had left him. Then he noticed that the door had lost one of its hinges and hung so that awry that he could creep through the crevice into the room, which he did. In this room lived an old woman with her tomcats and her hen, and the cat, whom she called her little son, knew how to arch his back and purr. Indeed, he could even emit sparks when stroked the wrong way. He was a very gifted cat. And the hen had very short legs, and was therefore called Baby Shortlegs. She laid very good eggs, and the old woman loved her as though she were her own child. "Oh, what's that?" asked the old woman, looking around. However, her eyesight was not good, and she took the young duckling for a fat duck who had lost his way. "This is a capital catch," she said. "Now I shall have duck eggs. If it is not a drake, we shall have to see." And so the ugly duckling was taken on approval for 3 weeks, but no eggs made their appearance. Now the cat was the master of the house, and the hen was the mistress, and they were in the habit of saying "we and the world," for they imagined themselves to be not only half of the world, but also by far the better half. The duckling thought it was possible to read a different opinion, and that the hen would not allow.
Don't you lay eggs?
She asked.
No. Well, then hold your tongue.
And the cat asked, "Can you arch your back? Can you purr? Can you emit sparks?
No.
Then you should voice no opinion when reasonable persons are speaking." So the duckling sat alone in the corner, and was in a very bad mood, though he thought the fresh air bright sunshine, and that gave him such a strong desire to swim again, and that he could not help telling the hen about it.
Nonsense, said the hen. You have nothing to do. That is why you brood over such fancies. Either lay an egg or purr, and then you won't forget them.
But it is so delicious to swim, said the duckling. So wonderful when the water's closed over your head as you plunge into the bottom.
That is a queer sense of pleasure, said the hen. You must be crazy. You ask the cat. He is the most sensible animal I know, whether he would like to swim or plunge into the bottom of water. Not to speak for myself, as our mistress, the old woman, she is nearly as wise as a cat. Do you think she would take pleasure in swimming in the water closing over her head?
You do not understand me, said the duckling.
Well, if we do not understand you, who would? You think yourself wiser than the cat and the old woman, not to speak for myself. Do not fancy any such thing, child. Should be grateful to have all kindnesses that have been shown to you. Are you not lodged in a warm room? Have you not the advantage of society in which you can learn something? But you are just a chatterbox, and it's wearisome to have anything to do with you. Believe me, I wish you well. You can trust me. I can tell you unpleasant truths, and thus the real friendship is shown. Endeavor to learn how to lay eggs or to purr or to emit sparks, and then come back and talk to me.
I think I'd better go out into the wide world again, admitted the duckling.
Well, go,
answered the hen. So the duckling went. He swam on the surface of the water. He plunged beneath, and he would have been very happy if all the animals had not passed him by on account of his ugliness. And then autumn came. The leaves turned yellow and brown. The wind caught them and danced them about. The air was very cold, and the clouds were heavy with hail or snow, and a raven sat on the hedge and crowed with cold. The poor duckling was certainly most uncomfortable. One evening, just as the sun was setting with usual brilliancy, a flock of large, beautiful birds rose from the brushwood. Never before had the duckling seen anything so lovely. Their plumage was of a dazzling white and had long, slender necks. They were swans. They uttered a peculiar cry, spread out their long, splendid wings, and flew away from the cold regions to warmer countries across the open sea. They flew so high, so very high. The ugly duckling had a strange feeling. He turned around and round in the water like a windmill, craned his neck to look after them, and set forth such a loud and strange cry that he almost frightened himself. Oh, he could not forget them, those noble birds, those happy birds. When he could see them no longer, he plunged to the bottom of the water, and when he rose again, he was almost beside himself. He did not know what the birds were called, nor whether they were flying, yet he loved them as he had never loved anything. He did not envy them. It would never have occurred to him to wish such beauty for himself. He would have been quite confronted if the ducks in the courtyard had but enjoyed his company. Poor, ugly animal. The winter was so cold, so cold. The duckling was obliged to swim around in the water to keep it from freezing, but every night the opening in which he swam became smaller and smaller, which froze so that the crust of the ice crackled. The duckling had to make use of his legs to prevent the water from freezing entirely. At last, wearied out, he lay stiff and cold in the ice. Early in the morning, a peasant passed, who saw the duckling, went out and broke the ice to pieces with his wooden shoe, and he took the frozen little animal home to his wife. And there in the warmth of the kitchen he revived. The children came running in to play with him. But our duckling thought they wanted to tease him, and in his terror he jumped into the milk pail, so that the milk was spilled about the room. The good woman screamed and wrung her hands. In his embarrassment, the poor duckling jumped into a pan where the butter was kept, and thence into some flour barrel, and out again. But aside he now looked. The woman struck him with the tongs. Children ran races with each other trying to catch him, and laughed and screamed. Luckily, the door stood open, and he jumped out into the bushes, and in the new fallen snow, there he lay, exhausted. It would be too sad to relate the trouble and misery that befell our duckling during the severity of the winter. He was lying in the moor among the reeds when the sun began to shine warmly again, and the larks were singing. Beautiful spring had returned. And suddenly he shook his wings. They were stronger than ever, bore him forward quickly, and before he was even aware of it. He found himself in a large garden where the apple trees stood in full bloom, and where the lilacs sent forth their fragrance and hung their long branches down into the winding canals. Everything was full of freshness of spring, and out of the thicket came three beautiful white swans, who displayed their curly feathers proudly and glided lightly and majestically over the water. The duckling recognized the glorious creatures and was seized with a strange melancholy. "I flatter them, those regal birds," he thought, "but they will kill me because I am ugly as I am. I presume to approach them. But it does not matter. Be killed by them than to be bitten by ducks, pecked by hens, kicked by the girl who feeds the poultry, and to have to suffer such during the winter." He flew into the water and swam towards the beautiful creatures. They saw him and shot forward to meet him. "Don't kill me," said the poor animal, and he bowed his head low, expecting death. But what did he see in the water? He saw his own image, no longer that of a gray, ugly duck. It was that of a swan. It does not matter that one was born in a duckyard if one has been hatched from a swan's egg. He no longer resented the troubles and adversaries of his experiences. He could now appreciate all the more his own happiness. The large swans swam quite close to him and stroked him with their beaks. Some little children were running about the garden. They threw bread and crumbs into the water, and the youngest of them exclaimed, "There's a new one!" and clapped his hands. The others also shouted, "Yes, there's a new swan! Come!" And they danced around. They called for their father and mother and for more bread and even cake, and everyone said, "The new one is the best, so young and so beautiful." And the old swans bowed before him. The young swan felt quite ashamed and hid his head under his wings. He scarcely knew how he felt. He was almost too happy, but still not proud, for a good heart is never proud. He remembered how he had been persecuted and derided when he was still the ugly duckling. Now he heard everyone say he was the most beautiful of all the beautiful birds. The lilacs bent down their branches towards him in the water, and the sun shone warmly and brightly. So he shook his feathers and stretched his slender neck, and in the joy of his heart he exclaimed, "How little did I dream of so much happiness when I was ugly, despised duckling!" And I have another pair of bots. What the heck? Let's say there's redeem in there somewhere. Oh, okay. It was salty. Thank you for the work. Let's see. Half an hour left. I've got another long story, so hopefully we'll get through it. So our next story, Big Claus and Little Claus. Once upon a time there lived in the same village two men bearing the very same name, that is to say, Claus. One of them happened to possess four horses, the other only one horse. So, by the way of distinguishing them from each other, the proprietor of the four horses was called Big Claus, and one who owned one horse was known as Little Claus. All week long, Little Claus had to plow for Big Claus to lend him one horse, because Big Claus lent him his four horses, but only one day a week, and that was Sunday. Rah, how proudly Little Claus then brandished his whip over 5 horses, for all 5 were his, at least for that day. The sun shone brightly, and all the bells in the church towers were ringing. People dressed in their best, walking to church, with their little hymn books under their arms, and looked at Little Claus, who was driving his 5 horses, and was so happy that he kept cracking his whip again and again, and calling out, "Hip, hip, hurrah! 5 fine horses, and all of them mine!" "You must not say that," remarked Big Claus. "Only one of the horses is yours. You know that well enough." But when another party of churchgoers passed close by him, Little Claus quite forgot that he had been told he must not say so, and cried out again, "Hip, hip, hurrah! 5 fine horses are all mine!" "Did I not tell you to hold your tongue?" exclaimed Big Claus very angrily. "If you say that again, I shall give your one horse such a blow in the forehead, and shall strike him dead on the spot, and that will put an end to your boasting of having 5 fine horses." "Oh, but I will never say it again, indeed I won't," said Little Claus, and he quite intended to keep his word. But presently some more people came by, and they nodded a friendly good morning to him, and he was so delighted, and it seemed to him but such a grand thing to have 5 horses to plow his little field, that he really could not contain himself. He flourished his whip aloft and shouted, "Hip, hip, hurrah! 5 fine horses, and all of them mine!" "I shall soon cure you of that," shouted Big Claus, and taking up a large stone, he flung it at the head of Little Claus's horse, and so heavy was the stone that the poor creature fell down dead. "Alas, now I have no horse at all!" cried Little Claus, and began to weep. Then he flayed the skin off his dead horse and put it into a sack which he slung on his shoulder, and set on his way to the nearest town, intending to sell the skin. He had a long way to go, and the road led him through a large and dense wood, and here a violent tempest burst forth. Poor Little Claus lost his path, and before he could find it again, evening had darkened into night, and he could neither return home nor go on to the town. However, not far off stood a large farmhouse. The window shutters were closed, but Little Claus could see light shining through the cracks. "Perhaps I can get shelter here for the night," he thought. So he went up to the house and knocked at the door. The farmer's wife came and opened it to him, and when she heard what he wanted, she told him he must go and ask elsewhere. The farmer was not at home, and she could not receive strangers in his absence. "Well, then, I must sleep outside under the stormy sky," replied Little Claus, and the farmer's wife shut the door in his face. Close by stood a large haystack, and between it and the house there was a little shed with a flat straw roof. "I shall get up there," said Little Claus to himself. "It will make a splendid bed. I only hope that the stork will not fly down and bite my legs." For a stork had made his nest on the roof, and had mounted guard beside it, wide awake. So Little Claus crept up on the shed, and there he turned and twisted about until he had made himself comfortable. The window shutters of the farmhouse did not close properly at the top, so that from his high and airy position he could see all that went on in the room. There he saw a large table spread with bread and wine and roast meat and fried fish. The farmer's wife and the sexton sat at the table. No one else was there. The farmer's wife was pouring out a glass of wine for the sexton, who was eagerly helping himself to a large slice of the fish. He happened to be particularly fond of fish. Too bad to keep it all to themselves, sighed Little Claus. If they would have just given me a morsel. And he craned his neck as near to the window as he could. What a magnificent cake he could see now. Presently he heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the road. It was a farmer riding home. This farmer was a fairly good-hearted fellow, but he could not endure to see the sexton. A sight of made him half mad, and that was the reason why the sexton only came to pay his respects to the farmer's wife when he knew the farmer was out. When they heard the farmer return, they both started up, and the woman bade the sexton creep into a large empty chest that stood in the corner of the room. He did so, for he knew the farmer would be furious if he came in and saw it. The farmer's wife then made a great hustle to hide all the wine and dishes inside the baking oven, for fear of her husband. If he saw the table spread within, and should ask whom she had prepared such a grand entertainment. Dear, oh dear, sighed Little Claus from his couch in the shed, when he saw the feast all put away. Anybody up there? Inquired the farmer on hearing the voice, and he looked up and saw Little Claus. Why are you lying there? Come down into the house with me. And Little Claus explained that he had lost his way and asked the farmer if he could not give him shelter for the night. To be sure I will, answered the good-natured man. Come in with me and let's have something to eat. The woman received them both with a great show of welcome, and laid the table and brought out a large dish of oatmeal. The farmer sat down with great appetite, but Little Claus could not eat for thinking of the good roast meats, the fish, the wine, and the delicious cake, which had been stowed away inside the oven. He had put his sack containing the horse's skin under the table. Now he could not relish the oatmeal porridge. He began trembling the sack under his feet until the skin creaked aloud. Hush, murmured Little Claus, as if speaking to the sack. But at the same time he trod upon it again, as to make it squeak louder than before. What have you got in your sack? Asked the farmer. Oh, I've got a little sorcerer there, replied Little Claus, and he says we're not to eat oatmeal and porridge any longer, for he's conjured a feast of fish, roast beef, and cake in the oven for us. My goodness, exclaimed the farmer, and he got up in a hurry to look into the oven. There he saw all the delicious food which the woman had hidden there. The wife did not dare to utter a syllable of explanation. She pretended to be just as bewildered as her husband, and set the viands on the table, and the farmer and his guest began to eat with a hearty appetite. Presently Little Claus trampled on the sack again, which made the skin squeak once more. What does the sorcerer say now? Asked the farmer. He says, replied Little Claus, that he's also conjured 3 bottles of wine here for us, and you will find them standing just in the corner of the oven. The woman was now obliged to bring out the wine she had concealed, and the farmer poured himself out a glass and began to think it would be a fine thing to have such a sorcerer. A proper sort of sorcerer this is, said. Can he also conjure up the devil, do you think? I would love to see that one, because I am just in the right mood for him. Oh, of course, returned Little Claus. My sorcerer can do anything I asked him. Well, that you will, won't you? He asked the sack again, treading on it. Didn't you hear him say yes? But I will warn you, the devil will look hideous. Better let's forget about him. I will not be afraid. I wonder what he looks like. He will appear for all the world just like a sexton. A sexton, said the farmer. That would be awful. You must know that I cannot stand the sight of a sexton. But it does not matter, since I know that it is not the real sexton. I have plenty of courage, but don't let him come too near me. Well, I will speak to my sorcerer about it, said Little Claus, and he trod on the skin till it went creak, 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 and he bent his ear down as though he were listening. Well, what is he saying now? He says that you only have to lift the lid of that chest in the corner and you will see him, but you must mind and shut the lid close again, that he cannot escape. Will you help me hold up the lid? It is very heavy, said the farmer, and he went up to the chest where his wife had concealed the real sexton, who was trembling with fear. The farmer gently raised the lid of the chest and peeped into it. Ah, he cried, immediately starting back in disgust. I saw him. He looked exactly like our sexton. How horrible! However, he sat down at the table again and began to drink glass after glass of wine to recover from the shock. Do you know, he said to Little Claus, I'd very much like to buy your sorcerer. Name your price, even if it's a whole bushel full of gold. Oh, how can you ask such a thing? Answered Little Claus. Such a useful servant as he is to me. How could I think of parting with him? I should very much like to have him, said the farmer. He did not stop pleading. Well, since you have been so kind to give me the shelter tonight, Little Claus, I do not think I can refuse you any request. I will let you have my sorcerer for a bushel of gold. Only, the bushel must be crammed full, mind. Certainly it shall, answered the farmer. And the chest over there you shall have in the bargain. I don't want it to remain in the house an hour longer. It will always be reminding me of that odious sexton's face I saw inside it. So the bargain was struck. Little Claus gave the farmer his sack with the dried horse's skin, and received instead a whole bushelful of gold. The farmer also gave him a large wheelbarrow in which to take home his money and the chest. Farewell, said Little Claus, as he pushed away the wheelbarrow and the unfortunate sexton so lying concealed inside it. On the opposite side of the wood flowed a broad, deep river. The current was so strong that no one could swim against it, so a bridge had been built over it. Little Claus made his way over the bridge, saying very loudly so that the man in the chest might hear him. Now, what use is this old chest to me? It's as heavy as if it were filled with stones. It quite tires me out. I shall fling it into the river. If it floats homeward to me, well and good. If it does not, it does not matter either. And he lifted the chest with one hand, as though intending to throw it into the water. Pray don't do that, cried the sexton inside the chest. Let me out first, please. Hello, said Little Claus, and pretended to be much afraid. He's still in there. The sooner it's in the river, the better. Oh, no, no, cried the sexton. Let me out, and I will give you another whole bushelful of gold. That's quite another matter, said Little Claus, and he immediately set down the chest and lifted the lid. Out crept the sexton, greatly to his own satisfaction. He kicked the empty chest into the water, and then took Little Claus to his house with him, where he gave him a bushelful of gold, as agreed. Little Claus now had a wheelbarrow full of money. I have been paid very well for my horse's skin, he said to himself as he entered his own little room. It will vex Big Claus when he finds out how rich my horses make me, but I shall not tell him how it came about. And now he sent the little boy to Big Claus to borrow a measure for him. What can he want with a measure, I wonder, thought Big Claus, and he cunningly smeared the bottom of the measure with pitch, hoping that some part of whatever was measured would stick to it. And so it happened. When the measure was returned to him, he discovered 3 gold coins sticking to the bottom. Fine doings, upon my word, exclaimed Big Claus, and he set off to the house of Little Claus. Where'd you get all that money? Oh, I got it from my horse's skin, which I sold yesterday in the market, was his reply. Really? Exclaimed Big Claus. A horse's skin's worth that much. And he ran home quickly, took an axe and struck all 4 of his horses in the head with it, then flayed off the skins and drove into town. Skins, skins, who will buy my skins? He shouted, driving through the streets. The shoemakers and tanners came running out to him and asking for a price. I want a bushelful of gold for each, replied Big Claus. Are you mad? They cried. We do not reckon our money by bushels. Skins, fresh skins, who will buy skins? He cried again. But to all who asked the price, he answered, a bushelful of gold. He's trying to make a fools of us, said one of the prospective customers, and the shoemakers seized upon the straps and the tanners of their leather aprons, and they began hitting Big Claus. Fresh skins, skins, fine fresh skins, they married them. We shall tan your own skin until you are black and blue. Throw him into the town. And Big Claus was venomously thrown out of the town, and he returned home, in no very good humor. Little Claus shall pay for this, he muttered when he arrived home. I shall kill him. So it happened that Little Claus's grandmother died that evening, and in her lifetime she had been very cross in her nature, but nevertheless little Claus felt sorry for her. He laid the dead woman in his own warm bed, hoping that the warmth might bring her back to life again. For his own part, he thought he could spend the night in a chair in the corner of the room, as he had sometimes done before. About midnight, the door opened, and Big Claus, his axe in his hand, came in. He knew well where little Claus's bed was, and he went straight forwards and struck the dead grandmother a violent blow to the forehead. "That's all for you," he cried. "Now you will never make a fool of me again." And with that he went to the room and returned home. "What a very wicked man he is," said little Claus. "So he wanted to kill me. It was a good thing my old grandmother was dead already, for that blow would have hurt her very much." Then he dressed his grandmother in her Sunday best, borrowed a horse from a neighbor, and put it in a cart and placed the old woman firmly in the back seat so that she could not fall out. And that was how he drove off through the wood. When the sun rose again, the carriage arrived at a large inn. Little Claus stopped there and went in for some breakfast. The landlord had plenty of money and was also good-natured, but he was also very hot-tempered, as it were to make a mixture of salt and pepper. "Very good A very good morning to you," welcomed Little Claus. "Are you on your way early today?" "That is so," said Little Claus. "I'm taking my old grandmother into town. She's sitting out the carriage, and I cannot make her come into the room. Would you mind taking her a glass of beer? But you must raise her voice. She is a bit hard of hearing." "I shall do that," promised the landlord, and he filled a large glass with beer and went it up to the old grandmother, who was sitting very upright in the carriage. "Your grandson is sending you a glass of beer," said the landlord, very politely. But the dead woman sat quite still and stiff. "Can't you hear me?" shouted the landlord as loud as he could. "Here's a glass of beer from your grandson." He shouted again and again, but when the grandmother still did not stir, he became angry and threw the glass into her face, so that the beer ran over her bonnet. She fell back in the carriage, for Little Claus had set her upright, but he had not tied her fast. "Hey!" shouted Little Claus, running from the inn and grabbing the landlord by the chest. "You have killed my grandmother!" "Oh, what a misfortune!" cried the landlord, and wrung his hands in despair. "That is all because of my hot temper. Dear Little Claus, I will give you a bushelful of money and will bury your grandmother as though she were my own. But keep silent in the matter, for heaven's sake, or they will hang me. And that would be too bad, wouldn't it?" Thus Little Claus received a whole bushelful of money, and the landlord gave his mother the most lavish funeral you could imagine. When Little Claus arrived back home with his money, he again sent the little boy to Big Claus, asking for the loan of his measure. "What?" cried Big Claus. "Didn't I kill him? I've got to see this with my own eyes." So he took the measure and went up to Little Claus's house himself. "Where did you get all that money again?" he asked, and opened his eyes so wide that it hurt him when he saw the big heap of money. "You did not kill me, but my grandmother, you wicked man," said Little Claus. "I've gone and sold her. They gave me a bushelful of money for her." "That is a lot of money," said Big Claus, and he ran home, took an axe, and killed his own grandmother. Then he put her in a carriage and drove into town. He stopped at the apothecary's house and asked him if he would not like to buy a dead person. "What was it, and where is the corpse?" asked the apothecary. "It is my grandmother," asked Big Claus. "I just killed her, and now I want to sell her for a bushelful of money." "God bless my soul," said the apothecary. "You're mad. Hold your tongue, or you might lose your head." Then he impressed on Big Claus what a terribly wicked deed he had done, and what a bad man he was, and that he ought to be punished. That frightened Big Claus so much that he rushed away, jumped on his carriage, and whipped his horses furiously, and sped home. The apothecary and all the people who had listened to the conversation were quite sure the man was mad, and so they let him go where he liked. "I shall get you for this," said Big Claus while driving home on the highway. Little Claus, I shall reckon up on you. Scarcely had he arrived home when he took the largest sack he could lay his hands on and went over to Little Claus and said furiously, "You have made a fool of me again. I've killed my horses and none my old grandmother. This is all your fault. I will drown you at once and put an end to your tall tales." Then he seized Little Claus by the waist and thrust him into the sack, and he went off with him. He had a long way before he reached the river, and Little Claus was by no means liked. Hey, Pepper. The road led past the church when organ was playing, for the service had just begun, and people were singing beautifully. Big Claus thought there would be no harm in going into the church and joining him before he continued on his way. So at the church door he set down a heavy sack with Little Claus inside, for he felt sure Little Claus could not escape, and all the other people were inside the church. Oh dear, said Little Claus inside the sack, and he twisted and turned as much as he could, but it was all in vain, for he could not loosen the strings with which the sack had been tied together. Just then a very old cattle drove passed by. His white hair was snow, and a stout staff in hand. He was driving a large herd of cows and bullocks before him, many more than he, feeble as he was, could manage. One of them rushed up against the sack and turned it over and over. "Have pity on me," cried Little Claus. "I'm too young to die. Help me out of the sack." "And I, poor man," said the cattle driver, "am so very old and cannot get into heaven." "Open the sack," shouted Little Claus. "Change places with me, and you will get to heaven almost once." "With all my heart," said the cattle driver, and he opened the sack, and Little Claus jumped out. "Will you not drive these cattle home to the village for me?" asked the old man. And with that he crept into the sack. Little Claus tied it up and went on his way cheerfully with all those beautiful cows and bullocks. Presently Big Claus came running back. He took up the sack and once more flung it across his shoulder, thinking that the burden seemed very much lighter, for the old cattle drover was only half the weight of Little Claus. "It always does when good rest for so tired," thought Big Claus. So on he trudged to the river, which was wide and deep, and flung the sack with the old cattle driver into it, and shouted after it, "There now, Little Claus, you will never cheat me any more." For he was quite sure that Little Claus had been inside the sack. Then he turned homewards, and passing a spot where several roads crossed, whom should he meet but Little Claus himself, with a herd of fine cattle. "How comes this?" said Big Claus. "Have I gone mad? Didn't I drown you just now?" "Of course," cried Little Claus amiably. "Just half an hour ago you threw me into the river." "But how did you come by all these beautiful cattle?" "These are sea cattle," said Little Claus. "If you like, I will tell you the whole story. I'm very much obliged to you for drowning me. It was only made me more than richer. As you see, I was very frightened when I lay in the sack, and the wind whistled most uncomfortably into my ears when you threw me down the bridge into the cold water. I sank to the bottom at once, but I was not hurt, because down under there grows the softest, freshest grass you can imagine. Now I fell on these grass downs, my sack was opened, and the most beautiful young girl, clad in snow-white robe with green wreath of wet hair, took me by the hand and said, 'Are you Little Claus?'" Cool. Thank you for the cheer. Thank you for the biddies. Have a good night. "Oh, you Little Claus, there's some cattle for you, and a little farther up another larger herd is grazing. You can have that too." Then I understood that the river was a sort of highway for the people to see, and that on it they walk and drive to and fro from the sea up where the river rises. And no place can be more beautiful than at the bottom of the water. The prettiest flowers and the freshest green grass grow down there, and the fishes in the water swim around my ears, just like the birds flutter around us up here in the air.
And such gaily dressed people I saw, and such a multitude of cattle grazing in pastures enclosed with hedges and ditches.
Then why are you in such a hurry to come up again? Inquired Big Claus. I shouldn't have done so. If not, I would have found it so pleasant down there.
Well, you see, answered Little Claus, that was very cleverly done on my part. Didn't I tell you that the sea lady told me a mile up the road, and by that she can only mean the river, because she cannot come onto our land roads. There was another and larger herd of cattle for me. But I know that the river makes a great many turns and windings, and therefore I thought I could just save myself half a mile by way of taking a shortcut across the land. So here I am, you see, and soon I shall get my sea cattle.
What a lucky fellow you are, sang Big Claus. Do you think I can get some cattle driven to me, too, if I went down to the bottom of the river?
How can I tell?
Asked Little Claus in reply. You envious scoundrel, cried Big Claus. I bet you want to keep all the beautiful sea cattle for yourself. Either you carry me to the water's edge and throw me over, or I will kill you.
Please don't be so angry, entreated Little Claus. I cannot carry you in a sack to the river. You are too fat and heavy. But if you will walk there yourself and creep into a sack, I will throw you over with all the pleasure in the world.
Thank you, but if I find no sea cattle down there for me, I shall kill you all the same when I come back.
And with that they walked together to the river, and soon as the thirsty cattle saw the water, they ran as fast as they could. All wanted to drink.
Look how they long to be at the bottom of the river, said Little Claus. That's all very well, said Big Claus. You must help me first, or I shall hit you.
And he quickly crept into a great sack which had lain stretched across the shoulders of one of the oxen.
Put a heavy stone in here with me, said Big Claus. Else perhaps I might not sink to the bottom.
No fear of that, replied Little Claus. However, he put a large stone into the sack, tied the strings firmly, and pushed the sack into the water.
Bloop!
There it fell, straight to the bottom. I am much afraid he will get his punishment and will not find a sea cattle, observed Little Claus. And then he drove his own herd quietly back to the village. Okay. Made it with fairly good timing. Ouch. And I still can't pause the ads. So we need to find someone to raid really quickly. Let's see. Magic Crawl is reading. You know what? I'm going to do something crazy. I'm going to read Cotton. So, thank you all for coming in tonight. And we're just going to go with a simple happy birthday raid. So, I hope everyone has a wonderful night. And I will try to get the stories edited as soon as I can. But for now, good night.